probably going to end up wandering and moving around. My organisation, TIP, is at its core a participatory organisation, a participatory arts organisation. So at some point as well, I'm going to ask you to be participating during the course of this session. Don't worry, I don't intend to put too much pressure on any one individual. What I intend to do with Necla over the next hour or so is give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour of some of our research projects, with a little bit of digging under the surface to explain the rationale and the practice and the approach that we take, and to show you some of the outputs from that, some of the creative arts outputs, some of the documentary outputs, so you can get a sense of where research can go in terms of dissemination when we're looking to present work to the outside world. There's a whole host of visuals. We've even got things for people to take away if they're interested. That's how nervous we were about presenting. We thought if we bring something to bribe you with, you might actually be nice to us. Necla and I like to make a simple and single contract with our audience, which is this. If it's really, really boring, if you don't like it, if it's really not, it's not giving you anything, can you just every now and again just smile and nod anyway? Because actually it's quite scary being down here. So when we're kind of looking up at you guys, if you occasionally smile, it makes us feel better about ourselves, and that improves our self-efficacy, So please, some of you are doing it already, which is really, really wonderful. I invite you to do that all the way through the session. Thanks a lot. I'm going to begin with an overview of TIP as an organisation, so you get a sense of where we're coming from and what our practice is about. We're quite old, really, for an arts organisation, an arts practicing organisation. We're over 25 years old, and we were established back in the early 90s by James Thompson, who is now, I have to read out his title because he's got quite a long title now. He's Professor of Applied and Social Theatre and is currently Vice President of Social Responsibility for the University of Manchester. And he was working at that point in time with a senior lecturer called Paul Heritage, both in drama. Paul's now a Professor of Drama and Performance at Queen Mary's. And they were looking for a way of creating a practice-based organisation that could effectively explore the new and emerging field of theatre with people who've offended. Theatre practices, participatory theatre practices with people who were caught up within the criminal justice system. So at the start, from the outset, we were quite a curious, hybrid, interdisciplinary beast. We had one foot in theatre and performance and one foot in criminology. And actually, if we had another foot, we'd probably have that in psychology as well, in terms of the practices that we use and that we developed. Very quickly, we discovered the demand for our work was outstripping our kind of capacity to deliver, so we expanded quite quickly. And one of the first things that the organisation did was establish the longest running, and I have to say, the best undergraduate course in theatre in prisons practice that exists in the UK. We have lots and lots of people who copy of us, lots and lots of higher education settings that copy us, but we are the best in Manchester at delivering this course. And we deliver it to this day. Indeed, I've got 16 third-year undergraduate students at the minute about to go and work in prison for a week to deliver creative arts research-based research work with groups of men and women in prisons across the Northwest. So we were a centre for development. We were a centre for research. And we're currently based, we moved from the old base, which was behind the Contact Theatre, to our new base in the Martin Harris Centre when drama migrated over there, and moved into that wonderful building about 13, 14 years ago now. It might even actually be a little bit longer. When I was thinking about this presentation, I was quite conscious about the fact that there were also a lot of ghosts on this stage with me. people who should be present, people who I'm representing. Necla I managed to drag along, so she's here, so I don't have to kind of speak for her, and she will be speaking for herself shortly. But there are a whole host of artists and practitioners who've contributed to this work. I'm their representative, if you like. I'm their mediator with you guys. We're a small team in the Martin Harris Centre. There's actually 4 of us, and 2 of them, the 2 Rachels that work for TIP, one who's a music specialist, one who's a theatre-based specialist. They're both part-time. And we are able to reach and deliver the work that we do through a huge network of highly experienced arts practitioners who are used to working with people. So participatory arts practice sits at the core of what we do. And I think you will immediately hear some resonances, some synergies when I talk about kind of participation, you know, the participant as a researcher in practice as I continue. Critically here, apart from the 2 Rachels, quite a bit of the work that I'm going to be sharing with you was done in partnership with a couple of absolutely phenomenal arts practitioners that I work with fairly regularly when I'm delivering these participatory research projects. One is a filmmaker and photographer by the name of Chris Charles, who runs an organisation called Creative Arena. You'll see their logo throughout. And another is an utterly astounding and ridiculously talented visual artist by the name of Paul Gent. And again, you'll see some of his work as we go along, and I'll explain why we're using it. But there are other people too that I'm representing here. I'm representing Dr. Joe Deakin, who's the senior lecturer who in criminology, who has played a really significant part in these projects. Dr. Claire Fox, who's also played a really significant part in a lot of these projects, also in criminology. And John Spencer, Dr. John Spencer, who also was around at the very, very beginning of the work that we did within the Centre for Criminology and Criminal Justice. So I need to acknowledge those ghosts at the start. They're here, they're present, they're stood behind me on the stage. I pray that I do them justice. Our first project was this beast, Blag. And I'll return to this later because I'll show you how we still currently use this particular tool as a research tool shortly, and you'll see some diagrams and drawings of that as we continue. So I will come back to that. When I was thinking about the title of this particular presentation, the idea that what we do is demonstrate peculiar ways of asking interesting questions. I think social research is really, really interesting. So that's the interesting questions bit. What did I mean by peculiar? Well, I think sharing the definition was probably the easiest way of exploring it. It's different. It's unusual. So it's ideally placed. It's out of the normal. For some of you, it might be really strange what we do. That makes it peculiar. But it's peculiar as well in that other meaning of the word, in that idea that it is particular. It's special. It has its own particular focus. So we use peculiar methods, and I'm quite proud to say that we use peculiar methods, because let's be honest, peculiar is just a wonderful word, isn't it? It's one of those words that rolls off your tongue in a way which makes you kind of feel happy and smile. Yeah, I can see that. It's going on in the room. Okay. Often when I'm invited to settings like this, to lecture theatres, to conferences, to events, what I'm asked to do is to unsettle and to provoke and disrupt the existing kind of atmosphere and just change what's going on a little bit. And this is no exception today. So I'm going to ask you to do something now. Be one of my favourite tools, my workshop egg timer. All right? It's a minute, that lasts a minute. What I'd like you to do is just turn to the person sat next to you or the person behind you and have a look at the shoes. Right? Have a look at their shoes. So everybody's got to do this. Find some. So you guys can go on, come pair up, get up, people, have a look at the shoes. Okay, and the next, what I'd like you to do, I'm going to give you a minute each, so hence my minute egg timer. You've got a minute each. You're going to tell your partner, the people you're sat with, the story of your shoes, right? So, I don't want it to be the real story. It's the real story of their shoes, right? So it's, where did they come from? Why did you buy them? Did they call out to you in a shop? Or are you just absolutely a functional Clarks man like me, you know? So, a minute each, and I'll call out when you got to swap over. Tell your partner the story of your shoes. Go. Time. Okay. You learned stuff, yeah? You learned stuff about the people you were talking to. I learned here today that Necla's quite amazing new boots came from Zagreb, and what did they say, from a railway station?
Where I used to travel as a child, through that railway station.
So she started to tell me and disclose stuff about her childhood, about where she's from, just through the shoes. What, did anybody learn anything interesting? Come on. Somebody share something with us. Who learned an interesting fact about somebody's shoes? Come on. I'll pick someone. Come on. Okay. Tell us.
I've been to London for 2 days. My feet are killing me.
So they're new shoes. And they're painful. Yeah, okay. Anybody else got anything? Okay.
My colleague, her shoes she bought from an outdoor store, trainers, but her husband wasn't impressed with them because they weren't waterproof, so her dear husband went back and bought her a waterproof pair of trainers. Bless him.
So again, there's bits of information that we're getting through a kind of silly exercise. That people are talking about themselves, sharing information safely through what seems to be a fairly daft, silly exercise. So a couple of things I know about this exercise, which happen all the time. Responses to it are highly genderized, right? So often we'll get very long, detailed stories from women that we're working with about why and how they've chosen the shoes and how many pairs of shoes they've got. And a bloke will go, "This is my second pair I've owned. I buy the same ones every 6 months." And I'm serious. You get some really interesting insights to it. Now, I do an exercise like this at the start for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it's about establishing a relationship with you guys. It's about establishing a rapport, which is not based on this kind of formal and highly formalized performance of authority, which I have that's invested in me by virtue of the fact that I'm down here. Lisa's given me a wonderful introduction. And I'm kind of here as a keynote speaker. So it breaks that. It breaks down that barrier a little bit. And partly it breaks down that barrier because it's just a little bit silly. I'm listening, I'm hoping that people laugh. Because that's an indicator to me that people are establishing rapport with each other and they're relaxing in the space. Again, through a silly exercise. You're also starting to talk about yourself. Which is what I'm going to want you to do if you're a research subject later on. I want to talk a little bit, share your ideas, share your thinking, share your view of the world, share your experiences with me. I'll return to this exercise shortly and I'll show you what happened when we used it on one of the projects that we did early on, actually, with the Centre for Criminology and Criminal Justice. Really interesting outcome. Very, very early on in the process. It does something else as well. One final thing. It breaks your state. It changes your state of consciousness. You're now no longer sat here as passive observers of some bloke that Lisa's dragged in off the street to do a chat about, arts-based research. It's changed your state. It's moved you into another differently receptive state. And that's quite important as well, both for arts practice and for what art practice does, but also in terms of opening you up for learning and talking. So there's key things that are about there. Just very quickly, How do we use arts-based approaches? Well, in the first instance, it's great for gathering data. And I'm going to show you a whole bunch of bits of evidence of data that we've got coming in through projects, not least some things like this. I brought examples with me along. This is evidence of data. Right? This is data gathering. This was a data gathering exercise, which I'll invite you to. You can have a look at later. I've not actually put on slides. We can use it to gather data like we were doing in that exercise then. That, by the way, it's a drama exercise. It's just a simple workshop exercise. We use it specifically to disseminate information, the outputs, the research outputs to stakeholders, to policymakers, and to present it in an interesting way. So there's 2 or 3 projects you can see up there. The 2 on the right were schools-based projects that we did, where we were doing research about with children about why they didn't like going to school. What were the reasons why they didn't want to go to school? And that you can sort of see the school river image at the top there, and a whole bunch of graphics at the bottom that children and young people put together. So we can use the arts-based output to create a much more interesting and engaging piece of literature or object that will attract people's attention. And we use it for dissemination to the general public. We make data accessible through the arts-based outcome. There's a whole collection of those here. As I say, they're our bribery. Our principles of practice. What we're looking at is dealing with inequalities in research groups. I've already alluded to that. I want to kind of break down the inequalities that exist in the space of exercises. And to generate a sense of trust and rapport from the beginning of the process. Again, I think we demonstrate that in the exercise. We want it to be participative. We're a participatory arts organisation, so people take part. We don't stand and perform in front of people. What we do is we make our participants the core of our practice. And that hopefully creates a democratised, self-critiquing group. Some words I put in, I can never pronounce. And critically, because we're an arts-based organisation, we want to empower people to longer-term outcomes through the practice. So by taking part in the practice, our participants learn skills, arts-based skills. They're getting something out of the research themselves. And what's really absolutely, fundamentally, critically important to us is this notion of a commitment to quality. The work that we want to make when we're working with our groups, when we're creating the research output, has to be really high quality. Why? Well, because our groups, the people that we work with, you guys, you're way, way more arts and media literate than you may well give yourself credit for. When you look at something and you think it's rubbish, you think it's wrong, you have a response, you might not know why you think it is, you don't like it, but that is a subjective response based upon a lot of your own personal experience of arts and arts practice. That is the same for our client groups. So what we want to do is represent their work as best as possible and their views in the best possible way so that they are happy with it, so they feel that there's ownership of it. Does that make sense to people? Yeah? Again, just 3 examples of different. That's the first bit of Paul's work there on the bottom left. So he will sit in a session with us and draw something like that in about 2 minutes. See what I mean about him being really irritatingly talented? And he documents a lot of our processes. The piece on the right came out of a project that we were asked to do by magistrates in Salford, where they were asking us to ask young people who they sentenced about their attitudes towards the justice system in Salford. And what they wanted to do was represent it in a board game. That's what the young people wanted to do, hence the board game. That was on exhibition in the Pump House Museum for quite a long time, actually, that piece of work. So again, that demonstrates that communication of research outcome to members of the audience, to an audience, a public audience. Okay. Let's talk a little bit now about the arts practice itself and what it is we're doing. We work from a principle that limitation is stimulation. Right? If I give people complete free rein to make a decision about something, they'll take absolutely ages to come to a conclusion. Whereas if I say you've got 30 seconds, and I have a timer, and I restrict you, you're more likely to respond very, very quickly. That's what happened in that opening exercise. You all started talking to each other really quickly because I just brought a simple egg timer along. I limited you. It stimulated a response really quickly. Yeah? So we place rules around the work that we do. Might be around taking a bigger research question and thinking about what the limits of that may be so we can articulate it more clearly to a group that we're working with and get some interesting and positive results for the researchers. This is an example from a research project outside of the university that we were tasked to do by this organisation Resettle, who are at the bottom right there. It was a project with men who were on a long-term community custody restriction type order, probation order, and who had serious histories of involvement within the criminal justice system often because of their violence. And we were asked to do some work with them to find out what they thought about the setting that this project was based in, the Resettle project was based in, and to get some information from them, ask them to share some information about how they think they've ended up in this particular setting. So it's kind of broad research questions. How they've ended up being involved in the criminal justice system quite so much. This example here on the left is another piece of Paul's work, but it's Paul working with a young man who was taking part in some creative writing workshop work with me. He disclosed in the session that he'd been in 57 care homes over a 2-year period between the ages of 14 and 16. So, wanting to find a way of encouraging him to articulate that a little bit more clearly, I sent him away to write a poem. We've done some creative writing workshops with him. And I said, but you've only got 57 words. Right? I want 57 homes in 57 words. This is the poem that he created. I won't read it out, but you can get a sense of it if you have a quick read of it. He came back the following week really, really angry with me. Really angry. I said, what's the matter? What's the problem? Why are you so annoyed? He said, I could only think of 56 words. So I put "so" at the end of it. But if you look at that piece of writing, it's the "so" which is the interesting aspect of it. He's looking to a future. He's thinking about change. He's thinking about the direction that he's going in. And that beautifully encapsulated within the piece of creative writing that he's created. But that wouldn't have occurred if we'd not placed a limit on that. Yeah? Placed rules around what we'd asked him to do. Quick thing about that, I can't lay claim to that idea, this notion, limitation is stimulation. I think I first got that from somebody back in the early 90s, a theatre practitioner I was working with. We've just kind of taken it and adapted it. I think it may have even been Paul Heritage, who was one of the founders of TIP, who first said it to me when I was an undergraduate in the 80s. We've just taken it and moved it to another direction. Very quickly, I'll share this with you. This is another piece of writing that came out. Okay, I'm not going to struggle with it for the sake of expediency. Part of the reason I wanted to share that with you was because it identifies one of the key issues that we struggle with in the presentation of some of this work. And it's about the ethics of representation. How do we effectively represent the people that we're working with? That particular poem that was read there was written by another one of the men we were working with on this project. And it sparked quite a considerable debate because he wanted the poem to be filmed and recorded in that way. He wanted his work to be presented in a certain way. It was critical to the project that it was put out there in terms of the way he wanted his input to be represented within the final film product. And one of my co-workers was rather insistent that it should be his words He should read the poem out. It was his. If it wasn't him that read it out, then it lacked authenticity. I came from a different perspective, which was that this particular writer struggled with getting his own words out. He couldn't perform it as well as he heard it in his head. And so we came to a compromise where we employed an actor. A guy that used to be on Hollyoaks, who watches it. A guy called Dave Judge, who we work with an awful lot. And he recorded the writer's poem, but being directed by the writer. So the writer still was a part of the process, but it's not him speaking his words. And again, this goes back to my principle of wanting to create work which is really, really high quality, that people can be proud of, that they can feel connected to, that it's theirs, that they have a sense of ownership of. And again, I'll point you back to these, which I'll invite people can have a look at in the break. These are a whole series of slides that came out of a similar, the same project, where each one of these images tells a little bit of the life story of the participants. And they worked with Paul, the visual artist, to represent those snippets of their lives or aspects of narrative in a way that they were happy with and that looked really, really effective and strong. So they were proud of these pieces of work. Brings me to the first of the projects that we did about say 3 years ago. Now, it's slightly more than that. We started the project in 2013. It was finished in 2014. This was led by John Spencer. Well, we were asked to work with them to explore the rights of undocumented migrants, how people were responding to a whole range of challenges at that point in time, undocumented migrants in Manchester. This was, say, with the Centre of Criminology and Criminal Justice again. This was IAA funded. And if you look at the image on the top left, you'll see the head, which was one of the tools that we used. But equally, if I remember this rightly, there we go. As you can see, that's me there on the left. Paul's paid to take a few pounds off me on each one of his drawings. And we used the same opening exercise. It was intended just as an opening exercise. We were working with a group of women who were refugees, asylum seekers, undocumented migrants. And in the first session, one woman shared an extremely long story about why she was wearing why she'd chosen these very particular shoes. They were walking boots that she'd bought. And we discovered, just through the exercise, it was because where she'd been housed by the state, by the Home Office up in Oldham, meant that she had to walk into Salford every 2 weeks to report to Dallas Court. So she'd chosen her shoes on the basis that she had to do that. I can't even begin to imagine how many, 15 miles, maybe more, every fortnight. And that came out of just that simple opening exercise. So sometimes we have this plan for a workshop, which we, by necessity, have to abandon because of something which is raised in the opening session, the opening question. This particular beast, it's a very simple research tool, really. What I do is when I'm working with a group, I ask them to imagine that this is a missing member of the group. This is just somebody who could be here. So they could be a postgrad researcher, and they've come to the Methods Fair today, and it's whiteboard. And what we do is we fill in lots and lots of information using whiteboard pens about that character. Everybody contributes to the creation of this particular character. We make somebody who is using theatre and drama techniques, who could be in this space right now in the audience. And it's an amalgam of everybody in the space, and then we take that and we ask them, we can ask a whole range of questions about this particular character. We're also gathering information about the audience as we go. It's been particularly effective. It was a particularly effective tool on a project that we ran, started about 10 years ago now, when we began to do work as an organisation with men who sell sex to men in the city centre. There were very few projects working with them at that point in time. I think men with multiple complex needs. And we used this as a research tool with a group of those young men, which allowed us then to create a whole host of projects, which resulted in the establishment of a separate new charity in the city centre called the Men's Room, which has been running now for about the last sort of 6 or 7 years. I think I've got a close-up of it next. You can sort of see how it's working. Yeah, there you go. So there's me in the middle, asking why did she choose to come to the UK, and then the character, information about the character is added to the head. The next project that we got involved with was with Claire Fox. And this employed a methodology that I'm sure quite a lot of you may well have come across. It used photo elicitation. So it was inspired by photo elicitation methods. And Claire was interested in finding out what the daily lives of undocumented migrants in Manchester were like. So I worked very closely with Chris from Creative Arena, and we worked with the men and women on the project to teach them photography skills. And we deliberately gave them disposable cameras. We didn't let them take photographs on the phones. And the rationale for that was aesthetic. It was, you get a certain feel when you've got an old-fashioned camera film developed, and it looks a very particular way. There was an aesthetic reason, but there was also a research-based reason as well, which is that we didn't want people deleting photographs that they'd taken. So it's harder for them to censor what they're taking shots of. It also reminded me about that wonderful surprise of getting a film back from Boots that I used to have as a kid. You know, we don't have that these days. It's so immediate, and there was a lovely process, therefore, that happened that was unintended, that was part of the process, that would take these cameras in and then a couple of weeks later go back to the group and say, here are the photographs you've taken, and explore them and explore the rationale for taking the photographs along the way. There were a lot of really interesting and unintended outcomes with this project. I'll just show you this page. So this is a page from the book that we made. To use Blurb is a wonderful way of being able to share your research data and your photographs. So we created a book called Documenting the Undocumented. And the narrative is more conventional. It's come from interview, and it's come from focus group, and from the elicitation interviews following the photographic kind of expeditions themselves. When I was selecting which images to use, I was looking at them yesterday, and I kind of thought it was Halloween yesterday. That one on the left, it's incredibly evocative. Somebody spent ages setting that up. You know, they've gone home to their flat and set that up. There's one which always freaks me of one of the women got a doll, and she put water on its face so it was crying, and took a photograph of that. The response, when we asked the woman about the one on the right, you know, it's like the picture of the baby struggling to swim. It's a sense of anxiety for the photographer, for the woman who took that photo. And another one I've not included here, but is worth acknowledging, is a wonderful, wonderful photograph of an origami swan, which is about this big. It's made of small swans that are all interweaved. And when we asked, why did you take a photograph of this? It was because it opened up a whole rich narrative of her time in Yarl's Wood Detention Centre. How she'd learned origami in Yarl's Wood. And then when she got out, she used the origami skills to build this incredible swan that was made of, like I say, lots of little swans. But rather beautifully, I think, and rather inspired, she was using, the paper she was using were all the documents she was getting from the Home Office. So there was a wonderful poeticism. You know, that would be worthy of, you know, that's art practice. It's kind of inspired art practice. But she hadn't realised quite how inspired it was. Lots of interesting stuff came out of this one. Actually, I'm just going to skip back before I invite Necla up, just to kind of show you this. The pictures at the top right. Do people recognise where they are? Piccadilly? Yeah, in the city centre. There were a whole host of photos that came in that were completely empty streets. Now, the rule was anyway, they weren't, with limitation and stimulation, so the rule we placed on this is you can't take photographs of each other or people. And that was partly to protect the anonymity of the people that we were working with, and in part about a restriction. And we got a lot of images of completely empty streets with really interesting light. And then a lot of pictures of very, very crowded Piccadilly. And what that allowed us to explore with the groups was the fact that they were often forced to, the project was done over the summer, they were often forced to leave their homes, their hostels, wherever they were living at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and would walk the streets. So a lot of the empty street photographs were taken at 5 o'clock in the morning. And then they would move to Piccadilly because they felt safe and secure in the crowd. Even though, from my perspective, Piccadilly is an area where they're also extraordinarily vulnerable to crime and criminality and becoming victimised. Okay. So, Myman, I'm going to ask Necla to talk about this. You've heard a lot from me. So Necla was very closely involved with this project. So I'm going to ask her up to talk a little before we have a short look at some video material.
Okay, thank you for the welcome. Mine is a project I joined in 2015 when it had already started. So, and it was a bit, I think, so because I didn't join at the beginning, I didn't really know what was thought of at the beginning. But when I joined in, they already had a workshop with Simon, a focus group, and just maybe let me start by telling about the project. It was a European project funded by the European Commission. It involved 7 partners, and the project was about trying to identify dimensions of well-being of young migrant men. So we were interviewing young migrant men who had came to the UK, so were migrants, had a status where either a student came as refugees and were aged 16 to 29. And in these countries we did interviews, but in the UK, and focus groups they did in the other countries, but in the UK we chose this arts-based method and worked with Simon. And the way Simon developed in Manchester was, we first started just with we approached one community organization, Migrant Supporting Migrant, and then we did a focus group with them, that kind of arts-based focus group. And from there on, lots of other engaged ways of engagement emerged. So from the first focus group we then moved on to have a peer research training with those participants. And then from there we got some peer researchers involved in doing interviews, coming along to the final event. And the way we organized the final event, and lots of the drawings are from there. So because we were from the beginning trying always to find ways of getting people involved and doing it differently, so things developed from there. So on the final event we held in Manchester, we had all the 7 partners, the researchers coming, everybody invited one policymaker from those countries, and then we also had budget to invite young migrant men. So we had, I think, 7 young migrant men coming from Ireland, but from the other European countries, because of visa, they had to apply for visa and everything. We had 1 young man coming from Czech Republic, Finland, Italy, Germany, and so on. So on our final event, we then had to do something with them, and then that's where Simon got involved again. Maybe you sort of
Should we show them a little bit of the video?
Yeah, and then the video, for example, so on that final event we had a panel and we invited 2 young men to be part of the panel, along policymakers in Finland, for example, and academics. So we had a really lively discussion. We started filming, but we didn't really know what to do with it. We just thought we would do it. And then the young migrant men got on so well that they took it over, and then they filmed the whole event. And then in the end, we had money to give to one of them and do a little clip. And the way they did the clip was so funny, because there was a bit of information about the research, but a lot of things was about the kind of the assignment did with them and how much they enjoyed it. And we've been using this video a lot to promote and talk about the research. Yeah.
So hopefully this will play. I mean, I just don't know what's going on. It's probably internet connection. So this is a project that involved a lot of cardboard boxes. You'll see why shortly. This is me with my usual kind of cup of tea and stance, and several dozen cardboard boxes, and you'll see why here, hopefully. We can't watch all of it, but I'll watch about half of it.
Hi, my name is Alito, and I was one of the numerous people who got interviewed for the minor project. Let me tell you something about it. This is Simon.
Simon Rooney, and I am director of an arts-based organisation. We use arts-based methods to ask questions that maybe otherwise would not get asked, or we ask the questions that you're interested in getting answers to in different and unusual ways.
So, the day before, Simon gave us some boxes to learn something about us in an interactive way.
In the envelope, there are 10 pieces of paper with 10 sets of questions on them. You can answer whatever questions you want and ignore the ones you don't want to answer. The idea is that for the next half an hour or so, you've each answered enough that each of your boxes are covered in writing. Yeah. And we sent these cardboard boxes. Why? Well, I could give a really kind of complex, interesting explanation, rationale from an artistic perspective as to why. But the truth of the matter is, I was called into a meeting and it was the first thing that came to my head.
That isn't quite true. I was saying that for a gag.
What we miss in the countries we come from, what we like in the countries we're living now, and where we feel safe or something like that. Then we presented our answers to the group and we discussed them.
Have a look at what the people have written and see if there are connections. Okay, let me say some of the things that I see that there's a lot of family. Sister, family there, family friends, I think there's a sister there, brother. Where's the brother? My brother here, my brother there. So there's kind of things like that. There's a few people that have written about weather. What we're going to do now is take these down to the space for tomorrow. Okay? We're going to stick them up, we're going to put them up, build them in such a way as anybody coming in tomorrow can see them. Right? So, how many of us is there? There's about 15 of us, so that means we're going to have grabbing 3 or 4 of the boxes each. Right? And then what you'll need to do is follow me down the lift to the ground floor. The idea was that the box.
Okay, so it's about another 5 minutes of the video. What I want to do is just cut to the conclusion. So essentially what we did, the goal was to take the boxes. There was a deliberate act of carrying the boxes across the campus. Because in these boxes, written on these boxes and inside these boxes were lists of things that these young men had carried with them, that had brought with them to their new country, to the country that they'd migrated to. It's actually, my inspiration from that is a very brilliant book about, a very brilliant short story called The Things They Carried, which is in a book of short stories by men who served in Vietnam, and it's a list of things that soldiers carried. And I thought it'd be great to take that idea in a more simplistic way, and just we did it in the cardboard boxes, using the cardboard boxes. The men were then asked to just arrange them how they liked in the foyer. We're in the Schuster building next door, and they created a sculpture space. They took over completely. So that when the delegates arrived, they walked straight into the boxes. During the conference event itself, what we did was, shortly after that bit of video that you saw there, I invited everybody to leave the space to go and have a look at it. And whilst they were having a look at it, whilst the delegates were looking at it, the young men destroyed it, took it apart, removed it. as a kind of, again, an act of disruption and an act that was kind of representative of the constant disruption that they were facing. This was their creative choices, their artistic choices, which were communicating and have deeper levels of meaning. Which brings us on to this project, which we'll talk about for the last 10-15 minutes, the most recent project.
One point about the Mindman project before I move on. I think the key message I want to pass on is that you don't always have to have a clear idea of where it's going. It's good just to, once you decided to do something arts-based, you know, start off with that, and then so many opportunities will emerge where you can interpret people or come up with new things. So that was our experience with My Men, and the video and the final event wasn't something we've planned at all, but because by the end of the project we had all this positive dynamic and lots of work with other groups and other people, not just the research team, that we were then able to come up with something like that, and it was a very positive experience for the researchers, for the policymakers, and also for the young people who took part.
Yeah, the young people completely took control, didn't they, on the last day, which I thought was interesting. Yeah. And I'm going to say, but no, and I think that was interesting. So, in fact, I've said I wasn't going to say anything else, but you've just reminded me of another point, really, which was that usually at conference events like that, when participants are asked along to them, they sort of sit passively in the corner and are talked about. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to make them active owners of the conference, you know, make it clear to them that they had a voice in that space. They were not just the subjects of research, and they really did take control, and that was wonderful.
And you don't lose quality, just the opposite. You know, people just get more engaged and value it more as well if they see there are some participants part of that whole dissemination process.
Absolutely. So, Necla, can I ask you to just contextualise this piece?
This is the project before the one I'm doing now. So it's about, we wanted to explore the UK government counter-terrorism government project Prevent. I don't know if you heard about it. Basically, we wanted to explore that and the effect it has on students and teachers at school, because it was only introduced in 2015 in September. So when we did the first workshops at the high school, they didn't have much experience with it yet. The school had undergone some training and they had talked to their students about it, but apart from that, it wasn't a topic that was like there for many years. And if you had gone to that school and just did a normal focus group or workshop and asked them these questions, what do you think about Prevent, how was it, you wouldn't get much out of them, because it wasn't something they had experienced a lot or even thought about it a lot. So we got Simon involved and some other visual migrants groups who worked with spoken word poetry and instruments and music and so on. And we did 4 workshops. It was a 6-month project, so it wasn't a massively big project. We did 2 workshops with students, one with teachers and one with both of them, and where we asked, it was very interesting. So we gave, Rachel was working with us, not Simon. We gave them some research questions, and then we left it to her to come up with other research questions. So the way she set it up, in the first workshop, for example, we played lots of warming up games, lots of different things. We started talking about CCTV cameras, about confidentiality and anonymity, how it feels like to be at school. And for us, as researchers, it felt like, oh, when are we going to talk about the actual topic? And only towards the first workshop, after 1.5 hours, she actually asked the questions we were interested in. And then, but what we realized then, people were so, tuned into it, and they would say things in that 10 minutes that that you wouldn't usually get within even an hour, because we had trust and it was fun, and we as researchers, we were like 3-4 of us were there, but we didn't lead it. We were just taking part. So we took part as well. They knew what we thought. We took part at the games. She did really some nice warming exercises. So the experience from that our experience was that if you use such methods, you get out you unleash a really different energy, and you get information that you can't really get to that easily once because you need trust, but also sometimes you need time for the participant to think about it and go through that process rather than just being confronted with the question and then expecting an answer. And also prevent is quite a controversial topic, so we were not sure to which extent teacher would really say what they think, because whatever they think might reflect badly on the school or so. And when we did the workshop with teachers, we were really surprised as well the kind of things they said. Critical things about the program. Yeah.
So the research design it was built in that particular way because we felt that the teachers were a critical part of the process. But we also wanted to create a situation where, going back to my earlier kind of practice principle, like creating a democratic space where the young people could feel they could speak really openly to the teachers and the teachers could feel they could speak really openly in front of the pupils. So there was a process which led up to that joint workshop, which was using arts-based approaches throughout. Drama workshop, poetry, lyric writing, and music. So they knew that they were going to be creating a product. I'll show you if it plays. Hopefully it will. A little bit of some of the music piece that was created as a result of this. So the young people created lyrics to a song and played instruments, and it was all kind of drawing on the key themes that were at the core and the focus of the research. But it was a stepped approach. Go back to my earlier discussion, the opening exercise, the reason why I do exercises like that. What Necla has described there is Rachel stretching that process of relationship building out over about an hour and a half using theatre and creative arts exercises so that people in the last bit will much more freely talk and engage in conversation around the key and critical issues. So the process about not rushing it, that it's a process-based approach. Let's watch a little bit of the video. One of the things that Paul came along again, Paul Gent was involved in this as well, the visual artist, and he created a series of these cards, which they're here. We printed out as art cards. Again, really important to have tangible creative arts product for participants to feel that they can look at and go, yeah, that's me, that's my work. But critically with Paul's work, and I should have acknowledged this earlier on, is he maintains anonymity because only the people who know who these people are would recognize them. Does that make sense? Yeah? And we started working with him an awful lot in prison because we can't take cameras to document our work into prisons. So taking him in to draw what we're doing made absolute sense. Involving him in these projects was similar. When we completed this, we wanted to find a way of communicating, disseminating the research output to the public. And in fact, just going back, this was the poster for an installation that we made in Central Library. And it was essentially a small tent. It was in the foyer of the library. We built a tent that would fit one person. So you could go in, you could sit in it, and there was a computer system in front of you which allowed you to listen to and watch the music, watch the video of the music. But we employed actors to voice the words of the teachers and of the young people as well. So they further removed it from them. It maintained an anonymity and that kind of trust that we'd established with them. I think it was really interesting because we were going to put it in the school, weren't we? But the school were very nervous about having it, which I think speaks to the power of the disclosures that were made during the workshop process. One of the things that really struck me, because I was one of the actors that read the teacher's stuff out, one of the things that really shocked me was hearing the young people talk about the fact that they saw safeguarding as a negative term. They would say to each other, "You've been safeguarded," or "I'm going to get you safeguarded." which was really interesting. The teachers were quite shocked by this, weren't they? Because they obviously, from our adult agenda, we perceive sort of safeguarding as something which is really positive and making sure that children are fine. But what the children had done, because of the way it was being rolled out in this particular school, perceived it as something which was a punishment. Let's see if I can make this video play. I'm hoping that I can.
Safeguard, detention. Things have changed since Victorian times. You never had mobile phones, computer games. The rules have changed.
Okay. I'm going to just skip through, because again, I'm just conscious of time. It's quite a long thing, and I can share the link to it if anybody's interested. Just bringing us completely up to date. This is the current project that we're working with Joe Deakin, with Necla. This is a Horizon 2020, if I remember rightly, and this pan-European project, which is using an awful lot of photo elicitation, again, with young people, looking at young people's social engagement across the continent. Right, I'm going to move on, just allow a little bit of time for questions, if there are any. So there's some starting points for discussion. But thanks for being here. Any discussion? Thank you for the nodding and the smile.